Hello, everyone. Today we'll continue talking about Sandel's great book on justice, and we'll continue talking about his chapter 6 on Rawls. We said that the basic idea for Rawls was that justice or fairness are grounded in hypothetical contracts or agreements between ideal agents that are fully knowledgeable, that are fully rational, and that are equal in their agreements, and they're coming together to form a decision, form a contract. There is no greater power, bargaining power, the one has over the other. Rawls called that position of making decisions, of agreeing upon principles that govern society, what he calls the principles of justice. He called the position the original position. And the agreements that follow from that original position would be fair, he thought, because people would be fully rational, will be equal, will act on rationality, and crucially, there will be the veil of ignorance, which will isolate the moral perspective by removing particularities that are not relevant, like what gender you happen to have, what religion you happen to belong to, how much money you happen to have, and things like that. It is your equal dignity as a human person that is guiding the decision making for the principles of a just society. So that's the basic picture. Here's a crucial question, though. What principles would be chosen by people in those ideal conditions? What kind of principles will be agreed upon by those ideal agents that know enough, that are rational enough, and so on, that are under the veil of ignorance, that are not motivated by selfishness or bias or prejudices? What are the principles of justice that would be chosen in these conditions? So that's the basic question. And Rawls argues persuasively that there wouldn't be utilitarian principles. The utilitarian principle would be one in which the right principles for justice are the ones that maximize happiness. And that can come, and many times does come, at the expense of sacrificing or oppressing a minority, sending the Christian to be eaten by the lions for the amusement of the crowd. Arguably, the pleasure, the happiness is maximized because there are a lot more people that are being, thrilled, enjoying the spectacle, even though Christians are being thrown into the lions. So Rawls argues persuasively that people in the original position would say, not that society. Why not? Well, I might end up being the Christian, but I might be eaten, right? I'm not going to choose that. I don't know which position in life I would have. And full equality, treating people equally, requires that veil of ignorance. It requires thinking this way. And if you think that way, then you wouldn't choose the utilitarian principles, because you would not want to risk being a member of the oppressed minority who's being sacrificed for the amusement of the majority. And therefore, Rawls thinks that is not just a principle, a utilitarian principle, even though it maximizes happiness. Rawls continues, people in the original position, ideal agents in the original position, would also not choose the libertarian, the purely free market way of conceiving of society. Because they themselves, the ideal agents, will recognize that if you're born homeless into a society governed by purely capitalistic free market economy, your prospects for success in life are extremely diminished. In a free market, it is largely the capital that you have that drives how well your chances for doing well. And the people in the original position would not want to risk being born homeless or extremely poor and having very little access to governmental programs and things like that to get out of poverty. In a free market society, it's structured exactly that way. Those that happen to be born into a lot of wealth, they have their prospects for a happy life are greatly increased. But in the original position, ideal agents do not know whether they'll be born into extreme wealth, a lot of wealth, or extreme poverty. So they would not want to risk. In Rawls thinks, therefore, it's not fair to structure society that way. It's treating those that are suffering as though they're not equal by undermining what they would have chosen if they were to choose a just society. So that's undermining their freedom. So it wouldn't be, as Rawls thinks, it wouldn't be the utilitarian principles of justice, and it wouldn't be the libertarian conception of a just society. People in the ideal position would not choose either of those. people happen to choose those things because, says Rawls, they are on the winning end, winning side. They're the majority. That's why they like the utilitarian. They get benefits, or they have a lot of wealth. That's why they're libertarian, and so on. So they have this bias. They know they will get more stuff by those conceptions of justice. But Rawls insists that's not to be fair. That is to structure society for your benefit, and that's not fairness. That's something else. So what are the principles that would be chosen? There are two main principles, and one is the equal liberties principle. And it's the principle that says each and every individual should have a maximum amount of liberties, rights, and opportunities. And a maximum amount of those things that is compatible with everyone else having the same amount of those liberties and rights. So here's one way of maximizing liberties and rights: becoming the absolute dictator. Everything you say and want becomes the law, and you get whatever you want. If you like a piece of property, you just say, I want that one, and it becomes yours. You have absolute rights and liberties. And that's a way of maximizing one individual's rights and liberties. But it comes at the expense of the rights and liberties of others, right? If the person that used to occupy the property that you now like, when you say it's mine, they have to be kicked out, right? So their rights and liberties are diminished by your having the absolute dictator rights and liberties. So what this principle says is that maximize liberties and rights, but only to the extent that it is compatible with everyone else having the same amount of rights and liberties and opportunities. So the basic idea is something like everyone's free to swing their arms as they pleased. However, that right, the freedom to swing your arm, ends where my face begins. When my face begins, that's where you're no longer free to swing your arm in that direction because you'll punch me. And likewise, myself, I'm free to swing my arm as I see fit, except where your face begins. I'm no longer free. Why? Because your right not to be punched precedes my right to swing my arms and constrains my rights and freedoms in different ways. Why? Because we're treated as equal. And Rawls thinks that's the first basic principle that everyone would agree upon, because it equalizes people in the right way. There's a second one that deals with income and wealth, a second basic principle of justice, thinks Rawls. And Rawls thinks that in the ideal position, people would not choose a society that is egalitarian in income and wealth. That is, they would not choose a society in which everyone has the same income and same amount of wealth. And the reason they wouldn't is because they have full knowledge. They know that some people are more productive than others. And if you give everyone if you distribute the economic pie in exactly equal terms, the pie diminishes. Those that are innovators, that are bringing about more economic advancement, they would be less incentivized to bring about more wealth. So the best way of making distributing wealth is by allowing inequality. So allowing those that have more of the drive, the innovation, the talent, for them to take a larger share of the economic pie. That's fine. That's morally acceptable, provided two conditions are attached to that inequality. And one is that the offices or positions that are accompany that having income and wealth are equally open to all. In other words, it's not that a particular race, skin color or something like that is correlated with more wealth. What is correlated with more wealth has to be grounded in something that's accessible, at least in principle, to everyone else. Offices and positions that are accessible to others. And two, inequality is to be justified or permitted only to the extent that it actually benefits the worse off. The reason why distributing the money equally amongst everyone is not the best way of going about is because by allowing inequality, there's a lot more wealth to go about, and those that are poor are better off by it. They have some of the side effects or the consequences of having a wealthier society. So that's a difference principle. Economic difference or inequality is morally justified on the basis of these two conditions. That's the basic picture. I do want to illustrate something about contracts and rights. So for Rawls, rights are secondary to the principles of justice. One has a right to something if that something would have been chosen under the ideal conditions by everyone involved. So the rights are do not precede the principles of justice. They follow from, their consequences of the principles of justice. And a good way of getting a handle on what this means is to contrast it with the libertarian. For the libertarian, property rights come first. There are the property rights. People own stuff. And then a good society is one that respects that. A libertarian might go as far as to say that when the government taxes the wealthy person, takes some of the property, they're violating their property rights because the government has no authority to do so. The property rights are first, and then they ground what justice is by letting people keep their stuff. Rawls thinks that's the wrong way of thinking about it, that it should be the reverse. People have rights, property rights, and any kind of rights, secondary to justice. Justice must be served first, and only after justice is served do people have rights. So going back to the wealthy example again, taxing the wealthy to help the poor does not violate the property rights of the wealthy, says Rawls, precisely because everyone involved, including the wealthy, would have agreed to such tax laws under ideal conditions. The wealthy now, or some wealthy now, do not agree to tax laws because they realize that they keep more stuff. But under ideal conditions, they themselves, if they weren't in the veil of ignorance, they would have chosen those taxes so that those that are worse off would be getting more benefits. And going back to the point about rights, put differently, the wealthy only have property rights to the extent that such property rights are compatible with the principles of justice. They do not have a right to opulent amounts of wealth while other members of society are starving. So from a Rawlsian perspective, it is false to think, it's false to say that the government taking money from the wealthy to give to the poor is violating the rights of the wealthy. It's not. Justice must be served first, and property rights are secondary to justice being served. It is no longer the wealthy's money because a just society is one in which some of the money goes to the poor. There's no violation of rights. Rights are secondary to justice, claims Rawls. And here's a similar observation about the picture. So think back of the feudal system, the caste system that was part of our history. We now rightfully look back at this feudal system, a caste system, and disapprove. We find something morally problematic. And here's the main objection to the feudal system, the caste system. It is wrong, we think, justifiably, for people to be forced into positions, especially of poverty, purely on the basis of the accident of birth. They happen to be born as a commoner instead of an aristocrat. So if you look at this painting here, there are people tilting the land. And during the feudal system years, if you were born a commoner, you were born a poor person, you were pretty much destined to work the lands, to till the lands. That's what you were going to do because you were born into that position. If you were born inside the castle, if you were in a royalty or aristocracy, you were born into positions of wealth, you were born into positions of social recognition, you were just born into those things. And then you will get all of the social benefits pretty much just by being born into the right place. And now we think this arrangement, this social arrangement, drastically undermines or violates equality between people. There's something immoral that undermines the equality precisely because the distribution of wealth and resources is grounded in something accidental, the accident of where you happen to be born, the accident of birth. Where you happen to be born is not your doing. It's not something for which you can claim any merit, that you happen to be born in a good society, in a bad society, in a good position in life, wealthy, well-educated, or otherwise. That's something that happens to you. That's not something to which you can have any claim. That's something to which you have any merit. Here's the connection back to the contemporary society. A free market economy is definitely a step in the right direction, a step moving away towards the feudal system. That's great. But it is far from attaining the conception of fairness that Rawls puts forth. It is far from enough in getting people to be treated well. And here's the main observation to illustrate this, the contrast with the feudal system. In a free market, the prospects of success in life or doing well are largely dependent, highly dependent on being born into the right kind of place, being born into a wealthy, well-educated, well-adjusted, and loving family. in a larger society as well. But your prospects of success in the free market are, again, largely dependent upon where you happen to be born. They're not as strict as they were during the feudal system. But if you're born in a super wealthy family that you're going to inherit millions or billions of dollars, it's hard not to do well in life. I mean, you still can mess it up, but it's a lot harder not to do well. If you're born in extreme poverty with very little access to housing, healthcare, food, and so on, it's extremely hard to do well. Some people still manage to do well, but it's extremely hard. The main observation is the same one. The main reason we have to object to the morality of the feudal system is applicable, not as much, but it's still applicable to the free market economy. It fails to satisfy the principles of justice as would be chosen by people in the original position from the moral perspective. So let's end here. I'll see you next time.